Hello, everybody. This is Pam Arturi. I'm the Director of Employment Services with Easter Seals Southern California WorkFirst, overseeing employment services for Los Angeles County and the Easter Seals Transition Project in Orange County. We're very happy to have you join us today. This is the 6th webinar that we are conducting in our series, and today we're going to talk about community connections and the importance in customized employment. I'm going to share my screen and advance the slides. And if people can't see the slides, I'm going to ask that one of my staff please text me and let me know if you can't see the slides when I start sharing, because I can't see the chat box. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording this webinar today. All the participants are muted, so please put your questions in the chat box and we'll keep an eye out for them and get to those. And I wanted to be sure to introduce our presenter today. Our presenter is Marcy Hartman, who is a Senior Associate with Griffin Hammis. Marcy is the co-founder of Self-Employment Resource Network. She is also the author of Ready for Business, A Guide to Self-Employment for People with Disabilities. Marcy provides training to families, students, professionals, and advocates in the area of customized employment, self-employment, transition planning, and Social Security. And we're very excited to have Marcy with us today. And I will go ahead and share the presentation, and Marcy, you just let me know when you want me to advance the slides and I will do that.
You're amazing, Pam. Thanks so much. And good morning to everyone in Southern California from northeastern Wisconsin, where we've had a good-sized storm last night, and so the waves on Lake Michigan are a little rough, and it's a cool day here, and I am just thrilled to be part of this transition series. Thank you to Pam and the organization of this series. It's my pleasure and honor to be talking about how cultivating community connections is an integral part to customized employment. Thank you, Pam. And you'll have to tell me when you do it, so because I'm not seeing it.
Yes.
It's the next.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So the goal today, or the goal of customized employment, is to is all about community and work. So I put some pictures here of one of our most famous customized employment success stories. This is Pop and Joe from Kansas, and Joe worked with one of our co-founders, Dave Hammis. I think it was about 10 years ago now, when he was about ready to graduate from high school. So his pictures are perfect to go along with the idea of transition and having work as a goal. Just to give you a little bit of background, did it kind of whet your appetite for customized employment? Joe was an active guy, and he did not like school, but he loved to be outdoors. He loved to do labor, lift things, and I think he is a farm boy, and so being outdoors and around noise and people was a good thing for him rather than being indoors. So we call that finding out what his ideal conditions of employment were. His dad came up with this idea, one of the early founders of kettle corn. His dad talked with the local Walmart and asked if he could set up this kettle corn cooking business, and they said yes. And it has now grown to a business with over $70,000 in gross sales. I should have put his website up here so you all could look it up, but he's Poppin' Joe's Kettle Corn. And I guess now, according to his logo, he's gone into gourmet kettle corn because he's developed so many flavors. So he started out by going to county fairs. He still had been doing that. What's happening this summer, I'm not sure. But he's one of the lucky and smart business owners that had developed sales over the internet. So he has quite a large business outside of just meeting people at fairs. And obviously his business has grown dramatically to get that kind of income. So just to kind of give you a flavor of how we are going to be proceeding today, it's all about connections. If you wouldn't mind, Pam.
Sure. I have today's goals up on the screen.
Thank you. Our goal today is to talk about living life big, which we all know includes work. And I'm so thrilled that there are so many of you on the line and from varied backgrounds. So I appreciate everyone's participation today. We're going to be talking about connections, as the title said. We're going to go into social capital a little bit. I know that you're going to get another webinar on that later, but it all fits together. From social capital, we're going to talk about our very own circles of relationships. We're going to touch on a relationship continuum. And then we're going to figure out how we can best move forward with these ideas. I want to offer that if you have questions along the way, you can feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm thinking I'll answer questions at the end, but if one of Pam's staff sees a pressing question that they'd like to make sure we note along the way, I'm not opposed to hearing those. So next slide, Pam.
And I just wanted to say, I have some people saying in the chat box there's no sound. So what I would suggest is for anyone who's not hearing Marcy to please log out and log back on, because I do have some people telling me they can hear the presentation. And someone asked about the presentation recording. All of these webinars are recorded and will be uploaded to our Transition Project webpage on the Easter Seals SoCal website. So just so people know that. I will advance this slide. Thank you, Marcy. Having a vision.
Thank you. So everything begins with having a vision. And I learned this from some wonderful parents as I've gone through my journey of education around customized employment. Sometimes people begin life with their family member with dreams and visions, but then they receive medical and psychological diagnoses that may dash those dreams. Well, I'm here to say, let's dream big today. Let's have high expectations for individuals. Let's provide as much opportunity to live life to the fullest as we can, and not let diagnoses or let diagnoses limit us. If there's one thing I hear more often than not, it's that through the process of discovering personal genius, there's family members or staff that say, I never had any idea that this person could do this particular thing. And that's what we want to do as we go through the process of discovering personal genius. I know that Bob talked with you a bit about that process last time, and I'll be making references to it as well, even though we're not really talking about going through customized employment. We always want to think work, We want work to be a goal and to be a reality. And that's why I said that dreams with goals are going to become reality. So the last thing we want is for someone to live someone else's program, or someone else's program. We want customized employment to be all about the individual. And we can go to the next slide, Pam. Customized employment is about who is this person, where are they most engaged, how do we know they're happy, and what types of interests do they have, but mostly where are they happiest. So once we are learning that, then we look to make these connections. We want to look for ways that we can put people together with similar interests. We don't need to have similar skills, because we know that the skills can come if we work with them. But it's the interest piece that, particularly in early transition, we want to be getting to know. How does this person learn new things? Do they like having someone show them cards to prompt them to next tasks? All of this information helps us understand the person better and who they are. From connections, we're really going to translate that to our term called social capital. And that's connecting the job seeker with other people, and particularly businesses, that will widen their circle of interest and potentially provide some potential employment opportunities. Social capital is critical to employment because we need those networks of relationships who are living in the job seekers community and can be a part of this person's life. Next slide, please.
And just so you know, Marcy, I'm on the social capital slide.
Thank you.
Sure.
Keep on checking to see if my internet's on, and it's not. So I will continue this way and appreciate all of your help. So for social capital, the purpose is to increase the employment of individuals with disabilities by encouraging the use of their contacts through friendships and relationships and business contacts and places where individuals do business. So I'd love to give you some examples of how we have developed social capital with individuals and how you might be wanting to do that now while the student is still in a school setting. Even if that school setting is virtual, I have some different ideas for you to continue. And the next slide is on social capital that focuses on who do we know and who does that person know. And it can be through social networks. It can, we want to judge the character of that network by meaning sometimes we have relationships with the person at the bank, people that we see fairly often at the post office or at, I used to say the video store. We don't go there quite as much, but sometimes that's the place a person that you know might have contact. We want the characters of these networks is referring to how strong of a friendship relationship is it? How much does that other person know the individual? Now, the bank in Joe's community is quite aware of Joe because he loves counting out his money, and he is very much a part of putting together the deposit slip. And he goes to the bank with his support person and puts money in the bank. So his the character and the strength of that particular relationship is quite good. Sometimes the strength of our ties can be stronger simply by longevity. For instance, I had to recently change eye doctors. I had been to an eye doctor for 30 years, so she was kind of like family. But now I went to meet a new eye doctor, and I sense that it will be a good relationship, but we're not quite tight yet. So sometimes we have to look at that relationship. Also, we're looking at levels of trust, and that's a huge issue. As we work on learning through the internet, we're very concerned that let's see, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. We need to be very cautious with internet safety. But trust, if we have a long-term relationship with a person, you do have a level of trust. But as you get to know someone, hopefully you're building that. The most important piece here, I believe, on social capital is reciprocity. How about that for a morning word? What we want to be emphasizing today regarding connections is that you are having to not only introduce the person to these people that could be helpful to them in sharing their information, but then we want to make sure that the person that we are supporting can give back in some way. And I'm going to give some examples of that in just a few slides. Next slide, please. The foundations of social capital include that trust that we talked about. Trust can come from going to the same place frequently. Like I said, sometimes going to the grocery store is a place where we get to know people more closely, simply as acquaintances. We stronger foundation through honesty and through communication, and that's extremely important to instill in our potential job seekers, that we want, just like we want to be able to trust others, we want those people to be able to trust the individual. This is mostly appropriate when we're doing job development or even relationship building, because as consultants for customized employment, we want to make sure that we are providing the best and most positive outlook for individuals who we are supporting. We want to make sure that we are presenting those individuals in the most competent and most positive light. And that's done through honesty. A follow-through on commitments is extremely important in our relationship building. If someone says they're going to do something, we need to make sure they follow up and do that. And then we need to be consistent in our behavior. This might be a little bit more interesting with some individuals, but I think the consistency is going to come in your support of the individual as they present themselves to this new relationship, and most likely that will be a positive introduction, just on the basis of the shared interest that job seeker is going to have with the person you're building in the relationship with. Next slide, please. So the types of there's several different types of social capital. One is of a public regard, which is tied to formal groups. And I'd like to tell a story, if you don't mind, about Andy, who became a member of the Kiwanis Club as the director of the agency that supported him in employment, brought him as a guest to the Kiwanis Club. What happened was that we knew from just knowing Andy that he was a highly motivated worker and very committed to precision and getting the work done in a high production type of rate. So what we didn't know was that we thought he was kind of quiet and shy. And what we found out through discovery, and particularly by bringing him to the Kiwanis Club, was that he is quite a personable guy. So when, after meetings, when there was conversation, there was times that he would ask people about where they worked. And in particular, he talked with this one gentleman who represented a large auto sales group. So this was not job development. This was relationship building. This was Andy increasing his social capital and developing a new relationship. So this fellow said, you know, I work at this sales group. Would you like to come see me? See my business? I'd love to show you. And Andy said, that'd be great, but first, can I show you where I work? So first, the auto sales rep came to their agency and saw where Andy did different tasks, and he got to show off some of the work that he was so proud of. But then when they went to the next, to the auto sales group to just look around, it ended up that this was in a time of a different recession where people had been laid off, and therefore there were certain tasks around the company that weren't getting done. So the employment person was able to negotiate a created job for Andy that fulfilled some unmet needs of that business. This is, it actually does happen quite often in customized employment when we take the time to get to know people, when we listen to people and observe. It's kind of like a miracle, the way that relationships can be built. Now, the funny thing about this story is, and it truly is funny, is that Andy is a huge Chicago sports fan, and he is in particularly a strong Chicago Cubs fan, which means that he has very strong negative feelings for the Chicago White Sox. Well, when Andy toured this auto sales group and he saw this fellow's office, what do you think was in that office? It was not Chicago Cubs paraphernalia, it was the White Sox. So Andy immediately developed this guy relationship with this potential supervisor, saying, "Oh no, we're strictly Chicago Cubs." So that gave this new dimension to this relationship, and these guys hit it off famously, and that's how they were able to really strengthen the developing relationship as employer and employee, as opposed to two guys at a Kiwanis Club meeting. So that was kind of a long explanation of how we we might be able to use the type of social capital called public regard. But these are just some of the ways that we can make connections with individuals. The private regard is more like informal groups, as particularly through church or different neighborhood activities. So an important part of employment consultants is to get to know the community with which the person lives in, to not just look at the big stores that are in their area, but to really get to know what's going on. Are they able to have small neighborhood music gatherings? Are there any small outdoor theater groups? Are there baseball games going on right now? I'm afraid I know California is in the news for being a hot spot, so I hope that some of these are things that you can look into. What I'm thinking, if we need to be looking at making ties virtually, is that then we would go into Facebook or Instagram or those different social media avenues to see if there are any groups with similar interests for the individual that you're working with, and try to explore any connections that you might be able to make in a safe way with the individual. There is also a formal versus informal type of social capital. It's with some could be committees with bylaws versus others that are social interest or hobby related. One of the biggest social activities that we've been hearing more and more of are book clubs. And whether that would be something of interest to the person you're working with, I'm not quite sure. I know that there are programs or opportunities through a group called Goodreads, which has a facilitator, but then does work with individuals outside of the public service or public service agency type setting. So again, this is a way for you to really expand ways to get to know people with similar interests. One time I worked with a young woman who loved Harleys. So one of the things that we did to kind of connect her with others who have that love was to go to a motorcycle shop and just start talking with the people there and ask them if they were aware of any groups or, first of all, you do a lot of listening to hear about the passion of the person that you're talking with. And then you would follow up with additional questions like, would you have a recommendation as to where another place I might be able to talk with my job seeker? Okay, Pam, next slide, please. Another piece to look at social capital is looking at bridging. And this bridging part is where we connect individuals with diverse backgrounds, that we are not looking at specific groups. We particularly, and I know that Easter Seals is phenomenal at this, we particularly do not want to look at segregated activities. We want to look at things that are going on in the community for all people. But then there's bonding. And that bonding would be like a neighborhood association where everyone has the concern of their neighborhood street that they're very interested in. And I hope those two differences make sense to you. The next slide continues on social capital, where we're making contacts and building relationships that could possibly lead to jobs or other work-related opportunities. That's the purpose of social capital. It's connecting with others in a meaningful way to talk to people about their interests and skills and abilities. And then it's these connections that help us with additional people to talk with. It's when we're doing informational interviews with different businesses, we're learning about different industries. We're learning about the background of the business that this person created. And that's what's so fun, is talking with people who have this tremendous passion for what it is they're doing. What we call it sometimes naive job development, because when we're going to start relationships with different individuals or businesses, it's that we're going in not understanding or not having a basic knowledge about that industry or that business. So all you can do is start out with, tell me about how you started this business. Tell me about what it was that led you to this business. And this will help us understand even better if this is the type of business or industry that your job seeker might be interested in pursuing. And then at the end of a conversation, we always ask, is there anyone else that you would suggest that we talk with? And that leads to more connections. What we love about connections is that each connection offers us more opportunities. Another example of making connections is that a parent talked with their family dentist, who they had been going to for several years, said that her daughter was 16 and wanted to be earning money, and asked if there was a task that at his office that no one liked to do. And sure enough, the task was putting those little kits with the toothpaste and the toothbrush and the floss in the bags, or for each of the patients to take home. So a job was created for this young woman. This one young woman who's a teacher and is a student. I'm so sorry. And she goes in, I think it's 2 hours a week, and puts together those packages for the dentist's office to hand out to their patients. So all it did was asking. And that's the piece that's so interesting that we find out, is that if you just ask, the opportunities can be endless. The more we ask, the more connections. So Pam, just for curiosity's sake, my internet turned on, so I could switch over, or we can continue like this, whichever you would prefer.
It doesn't matter to me. I'm fine with continuing this way.
And let's do that so we don't interrupt.
Sounds good.
So the next slide I wanted, I'm sorry that, okay.
This is the surfing slide.
Now, this is what I call a community outing. This is what I wanted to instill in you today, is let's really explore the interests of a person. And frankly, students don't have a lot of knowledge about different opportunities. So where they may have some certain interests, you would do really well by that person to introduce them to a variety of different experiences. I don't know about surfing, but this is something that this young fellow was introduced to, and obviously he loved it. So the next slide I'm moving into is talking about our circle, the circles that we have around our lives. And I want you to think about this for yourself because of your own connections, but let's think about the individuals that we're supporting. Definitely, always, always, the individual that we're working with is the center and ultimate top, or center and top of this circle. Most often, right around our next circle is our family. And that family could be aunts and uncles and grandparents. The reason that we're going through these circles is to remind you that you don't have to be the only connector for the job seeker. We want to connect with the person's family, and we want to connect with friends. We want to make sure that we're connecting with people that the individual is seen in a positive light with. We want to see that we're connecting with individuals who know the person well. And we get such varied answers even from siblings than the parents, or grandparents and parents. So the more people you talk to, the more we understand who it is that we are supporting in moving forward. After friends, there are always acquaintances. But then we come with professional helpers. And those professional helpers are usually the people that we pay for services. And I would just ask at this point, what circle do you think is the biggest circle, or the one, which circle is closest to the job seeker in this scenario? If you don't mind putting in the chat box. What I'm trying to say is where are the most number of people? Which circle has the most number of people for your person?
If anybody wants to type in the chat box, I've got my eye on it.
I didn't word that question very clearly, so how about if I just answer it, which is...
Sure.
Oh,
people are saying family, maybe friends and family.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Great. But then after family, most people that are connected to the individual are people who are paid to be in their lives, which is a real sad thing. But frankly, the main people in their lives right now are teachers. It could be you as employment people. It could be rehabilitation counselors, doctors, therapists. I hope you're not hearing that car alarm, but I apologize for it. Are you hearing it, Pam? Oh, okay, it stopped. Good.
Yeah, it stopped.
Okay, so what we want to do is, our goal is to expand the acquaintances and friends section so that it's a bigger circle for the individual. The next slide does talk about the most important people in the person's life, important people in their life, and other people in my life. So this could be a little visual for you to do with the one of your job seekers, or even to think of for yourself as you're thinking about connections. If I were with you in person, I would have each of you do these circles either for yourself or for a job seeker for whom you're familiar. Because seeing it written out, particularly when it ends up that the most filled circle is the professional people, really helps us to understand the importance of making more connections. And that's why we're here today. I wonder if you wouldn't mind taking some time to think about who would be in those circles and maybe putting into the chat box. Either for yourself or for someone that you're supporting.
Marcy, maybe if you just want to ask the question one more time, I'm not seeing anything come up in the chat box.
Okay. I think what I'll say is that if you could copy that slide, if you could make those circles, and then use that in the future with your job seekers, or even for yourself, to note who are the people that are closest to you or closest to the job seeker. Who are the people that are next closest? We had family, but it could be mom and dad, and then the next circle could be brother and sister who are away at college. The next circle could be my minister, or my youth group leader, or my sports coach. So I just want you to be kind of delineating those circles in the future so you can see, first of all, who you're going to want to learn more about your job seeker from, and also to learn who might have additional connections for you to explore.
Marcy, Peter just shared that for him, most important is his family, but for some, that might not be true.
Right, right. We talk about that a lot when we talk about developing self-employment concepts for work. A lot of times when we are doing self-employment, when we're pursuing self-employment, for instance, in the case of Joe, they have very, very strong family support. But when I met Joe's parents a few years ago, they told me when he had $100,000 in gross sales, they would be able to retire and hire a full-time manager. But for right now, as you're working with individuals, family may be the place to start, and that's okay. That's great. But let's see who they might be connected with.
Marcy, we have a couple of other answers. Stacy said family, friends, siblings, local businesses they frequent. And then Charmaine said for the people she supports, it's typically parents, maybe ILS workers, and friends. Stacy V said closest to her would be parent, sister, spouse, and then she would say close friends or longtime friends, and last but not least, coworkers present and past mentors.
Thank you all very much. Good to think of all those people. Thank you very much. The next slide goes back to things to explore with the job seeker. we've talked a lot about interest so far, but let's ask, where does the person spend their time? Do they like hanging out at a pool? Do they watch television? If they watch television, what kinds of shows are they watching? We've had some really interesting success from understanding a person's television preferences. Several times we've worked with individuals who really enjoy police shows. And we need to get to the bottom of what it is about those police shows that are so interesting. But what some of the things we have found out is that the badge is so cool, and the uniform is just a really, really eye-catching. So when we've gone to meet with different police stations, there was a state police office that we went to that ended up having an unmet need, and that was they needed someone to help keep their office tidy. And although that was not the expressed interest of this person, just working in the environment with the other police and their with their badges and their uniforms was exactly what this job seeker wanted. So they ended up providing him with one of their T-shirts, one of their office T-shirts. But not only did they write his name on it and have the insignia of their office, but then they said his title. And his title was CSI. Now, we might think of the TV show for that, but in this case, he's the Clean Scene Investigator. And that's what was made this job so valuable to this job seeker. And although hopefully the people in employment services did not have a relationship with the police department, they were able to build it simply by calling and expressing an interest and wanting to learn more about what happens in their office. Another person that I worked with that had a similar background was a man who had been a phlebotomist. So his job was to take blood from people. But then he had a couple of very devastating car accidents that left him with traumatic brain injuries that resulted in seizures. So returning to that particular work was not going to happen. But it was extremely important to Roger that he maintain that professional persona. So a job was created at Quaker Oats, where they were creating different food products. So Roger was working in essentially a chemist department where they needed, where currently the chemists were having to take time out of their day to wash and sterilize those test tubes. So a job was created for Roger where he's the one cleaning and disinfect and preparing those test tubes for future tests. But the difference is that he got to wear a white jacket and all the other chemists were wearing white jackets. So that's what was important. So we have to dig a little bit deeper to find out what those interests mean. So finding out where a person spends their money is always a good thing to understand, not only for connections, but it also helps us with future motivation, doesn't it? We would want to look at their typical daily schedule just so we know what's comfortable to them and what all they're doing. and basically want to look at where are they happiest with different people and places and activities. The next slide is how do we do this? I've given a couple of different examples. I thought it was interesting to go to the Harley-Davidson store to learn more about people that enjoy motorcycles and where they go and how we could pursue that interest. Gaming is such a big piece of life right now, and particularly with our youth, but everyone right now. So what recently a person that I'm mentoring went to, actually she did not go to the person's house. She did a Zoom meeting with the individual so that she could actually observe this person set up his video game and then him playing it. And what she learned from that experience was his ability to maneuver the game quite expertly, which we know would be transferable to other computer type tasks. We knew that we learned that the games that he liked to play were kind of like war games that had a lot of action and blowing up stuff. So we know that, or we think that this might be something to explore more, to find out if that would be one of his ideal conditions of employment, to work in a place where there's noise or action. In the case of Joe with the making popcorn, I mentioned that he loves to do manual work, and so he would his role during the process of making kettle corn was to heft up these huge bags of popping corn and put it into the kettle. Then he was the one that would use this great big wooden spoon, for lack of a better word. I'm sure it has a much better word, but this great big wooden stirrer that he would keep the corn stirred to help it pop evenly and not burn. He loved the sound of that popping corn. So being able, and he loved being able to be involved in moving, that took some strength to maneuver that big stirring implement. So these are all things that we find out. But as far as connecting with new people, we need to check within our own circles. Do we have connections in certain interests that the person might have? Can we help to connect them to someone that can help us move forward? This is a continuum, because when we meet one person, that could lead to another person who leads to another, and we just keep on learning. And this is what's so important about starting this when we're in transition, as opposed to later in life, because when our job seekers are in school, they have so many more connections through the school with therapists, their friends, teachers, the principal, all sorts of different people that we can learn from. And the next slide, please. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Quinn, because Quinn is a perfect example of another person that did better in the work world than in school. One of the reasons I'm saying this is because sometimes we have different views of individuals while they're in school. simply because the school setting may not be where that person wants to be. That's kind of the case of Quinn. So his mother, even though he could have stayed in school until 22, decided to have him graduate and exit at age 18. And he started building his social capital in a variety of ways. For one thing, he was very involved in his church, so there were connections through church. He did have friends from high school, but what he ended up doing was to volunteer. And this is another way that we might want to connect people. By volunteering, Quinn actually did kind of a trade-off. He did this work for a nonprofit greenhouse, and through that work, he was able to get connected with a farmer who then helped him start an apple orchard. So when I mentioned about social capital having reciprocity, this is one of those examples of some give and take. So the farmer gave him some terrific startup ideas for Quinn's own business, while Quinn was able to be extremely helpful with this labor-intensive part of that nonprofit organization. The next slide is a picture of Quinn's circle of support. And I'm not sure if this is something in your area or not, but there are these organizations in Illinois that are called microboards, and it includes this circle of support, which are people that you've come to know through getting to know your person. The circle of support includes Quinn, his brother, his mother, his father, I believe his aunt is there, and people from church, people who really have Quinn's best interests at heart and can bring ideas to the table. It's amazing when you get people together all in support of the individual, the ideas that can percolate, and some of them turn into really helpful things. Not all of them, but at least it's an idea to move forward. It's a way of getting together. Quinn feels very supported by that circle, which is another thing that is so important about these connections, is to support our young person and instill in them that we believe in them and that we believe that in their competence, and that we have expectations for them to live a rich and full life. The next slide actually shows Quinn growing garlic, which was a result of working with the farmer. Quinn has actually started his own business called Quinn's World Famous Kraut, and so he right now is growing cabbages, and he he goes through the process of fermenting cabbage into sauerkraut, and I believe that's another reason that he is planting garlic, all for people's health. Now, the other thing about this business as an aside is that he's done extremely well during the pandemic. More people are interested in combating the virus, and there's evidence that by having strong, and I still can't get over the use of this word, but strong gut health is a powerful thing against illness. So Quinn has been selling quite a lot of his sauerkraut for this reason. The next slide shows that one of Quinn's tasks as a business owner, not only does he grow the vegetables, chop and process the cabbage, and then ferment it and put it into jars and label the jars and label the lids, but then he also delivers. Not all the time. Sometimes he has to mail. But a big piece of his business is for him to be able to deliver. It is so important to Quinn to be around people. And any way that he and his mother can figure out how to be around more people is what they're all about. He loves having parties and would have a party every night. Unfortunately, his mother isn't quite that much of an animal, so that's something that they try to balance. But I just thought it was interesting to think about ways that we can increase sociability. And again, as a way of reciprocating. Obviously, we could suggest that the person pull together a watch party for the a boxing match or wrestling match. That was something that we learned from with Andy, that he loved watching those events, and so one time he arranged for a pay-per-view and invited some friends over and put together some snacks, and he had this little party. The next slide. Demonstrates how Quinn is building relationships. And one of the ways is that not only does he go to the bank and goes to the store to pick up the jars to put the sauerkraut in, but he frequently goes to the UPS store and works with this particular service person. So all the while, since he goes there so frequently, he's building relationships that way. And I had mentioned earlier how important it was to kind of identify where are places that the individual goes to frequently now that we might be able to have that we might be able to learn from. The final slide on Quinn is on all these different things that he does as a way to increase his life and to increase connections. He lives in his own home and with supports. So as a neighborhood thing, he'll bring he will offer to shovel people's sidewalks or clean up yards, or as he's growing apples, he shares his apples. He will note birthdays and send cards or bring flowers to neighbors. So all of these are ways that Quinn is developing his relationship, not just expecting people to do for him, but for him to be active with others. The next slide is from the website and organization called Open Future Learning. If you haven't looked them up before, they're an organization that I believe is out of Canada. They are phenomenal in person first, supporting individuals in the best way possible for the individual. And this particular cartoon or slide wants us to think outside of checklists and stop thinking or using drop down questionnaires. Of course, this guy would like to do a naked bungee jump, and the lady is responding, well, no, you can't do that because it's not on the drop-down list. Well, we want to throw those drop-down lists out and start thinking creatively. Again, we may not do the naked part, but at least we need to honor this desire. Let's see what we could do that might be similar. And obviously, let's think of outside the box, because even though this person is a user of a wheelchair, doesn't mean that they can't be living life. I'm sure that you all have seen adaptive sports, and that may be one other thing to pursue as you're working with individuals. So this next slide, I just wanted to provide to you to make sure that we credited Pathfinder's consulting services. But if you go on to the next slide, Pam, I appreciate it. What we're looking at right now is this relationship continuum. And the continuum starts with rejection and moves through the process to the part of celebrating the individual. And the next slide refers to this as a visual tool that describes the journey humans travel from rejection towards celebrating. And one of the best examples of this continuum was of a parent that I did this presentation with, who said, her first date with her husband didn't go very well. She wasn't quite sure about the future there. So it was pretty much fell in that rejection category. On the second date, she was able to, I believe we're going to the next slide now.
This is the first step away from rejection is tolerance.
Thank you very much. So she did give him a second try. And so it moved from rejection to tolerance. So when we think about individuals with barriers to employment and to life, we understand that there's way too much rejection. And so this is why I can't encourage people enough to make sure that we're presenting people in the most competent manner and also in the most positive. But recognizing that there are prejudices and negative thoughts about people that don't know individuals, we want to offer that ability to move past rejection into tolerance and then into acceptance. The next slide is another photo from Open Future Learning, and there's the website address where Kathy Snow says, sometimes it's not the doing, it's the being, and just being with someone. So as you're making connections, we may not be asking that person to be going out of their way to take a person surfing or to go bungee jumping, but just to be with the individual, talk about their common interests together, and just to be a human with each other. The next slide talks about the journey through acceptance into the dramatic stage. And the dramatic stage represents acting out the right thing to do. So this is making reference to those times in our relationships where things are really going great and the relationship is flowing and feeling strong. And then the next slide goes to embracing and then celebrating the entire person. And it's all genuine at this point. So this is just a kind of a visual about how our relationships do grow and change as we work with people. So celebrating uniqueness, we strive for celebration, but sometimes it's at different levels. So we are so blessed by the uniqueness of the individuals that we work with and the gifts that each one offers. And this, from Open Future Learning, reminds us that systems focus on problems. They focus on barriers. But as we move out into the community, the problems don't get you anywhere. That's why we need to be offering the best that the person can be. We want you to see the community. You have to focus on what the individual can bring. The next slide is about uncovering that giftedness. Sometimes that process is difficult, and sometimes we have to let go of some roadblocks that stop us. For instance, when Roger wanted to go back into the medical field, we realized that wasn't in his interest, in his best interest, or the interest of patients. But we admired the persistence to want to stay in the field, and we recognized the value in wearing that white lab coat as a professional in his community. So it's really important that as we make these connections and learn about people, that we're uncovering that giftedness, others sharing, and celebrate the individual as a valued person. The next slide refreshes our memory on the fact that we need to be reciprocal in our working together. And we want to make sure that we think about the various places that we can be making connections. It could be through spiritual communities. It can be through entertaining. I don't know about you all, but I have been so impressed by the adaptability of businesses to deal with the barriers of the pandemic, where they are able to think of new ways to provide their services, particularly in restaurants by moving more of their dining outside. I've seen more restaurants developing food trucks that offer individualized meals in a more casual setting without having a person to go inside a restaurant. There are so many groups and clubs that are supporting people in need during the pandemic, and that would be a way to connect the individuals you're working with if they have an interest in the work that particular group is doing. Another way that we work on social capital is when the person becomes involved in self-advocacy. And so that's another piece to this puzzle. The next slide shows a picture of Nancy Brooks Lane, who some of you might have met through your work with Easter Seals. Nancy is sitting outside taking time to talk and to just be with these people. The positive effects of social capital, people in relationships can reach goals that would have been far beyond the grasp of individuals if they were by themselves. And that was a quote from Robert Putnam, who wrote the book Better Together. We are all better together, and that's why we want to help support our individuals in making these connections. The next slide are ways that we can harness social capital. And I made a picture, I included a picture of Brian here, who has true love and admiration for the fire department in his community. And it's a mutual admiration society between the department and Brian. Brian started a business of vending machines. He realized that the fire department and the police departments did not have availability of drink choices. So Brian, who has a particular love for Coca-Cola products, thought that it would be helpful to offer setting up a vending machine. Now, one of the reasons he was led to this was, first of all, his connection to the fire department, seeing an unknown or an unmet need. You might notice his, what I would call a fanny pack. Brian loves quarters. So when Brian's support circle got together, they thought about the fact that he loves quarters. He has true admiration for the fire department and public servants. He loves Chicago sports teams, particularly the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago Bulls. So they were able, with this support group, this circle of support, they were able to help him develop this vending machine company that has led to him having, I believe he's up to 25 different vending machines in a variety of locations, including golf courses. So he was able to do this with his circle of support. How would you be able to do this? I would challenge you to work with your coworkers, to connect with your board of directors so that they know what it is you're trying to do or what it is you are doing with the individuals that you're supporting. Even, like I mentioned, Andy went to the Kiwanis Club with the executive director of his agency. See what connections your director might have or your coworkers to help you get into different opportunities. The last slide is a feel-good in that there are unlimited ways to make a living. And I hope that from these few examples I've given you some ideas, but more so there are unlimited ways to connect people. We just need to ask. And that was the underlying statement that one of the parents I worked with said. I never knew that just asking could open up doors. So just like there are unlimited ways to make a living, there are unlimited ways to make connections, even in this virtual world that we're in right now. The last slide is my thanks to the Easter Seals of Southern California for this opportunity to be a part of your series, and to offer an opportunity to each of you to tell me what ideas have been sparked for you to make connections.
Marcy, we have one comment in the chat box from Lewis, who says there's a negative stigma when it comes to speaking to an employer, but we need to showcase the individual skills.
That's right. That's right. We are not about the barriers to employment. We're all about the gifts that person can bring to the employer. So it's all in the beginning of the relationship building. It's even gotten to the point where I would want to be learning about the business, not as a consultant for people with disabilities, but as a curious person who who knows someone who's got this interest. How can I support this person with this interest? And you do that by getting to know that business owner from an aspect of curiosity. You're not going to, particularly now as you're making connections, you are going, as I said, as a naive person, that you just don't know about everything about the business, and you'd like to learn a lot from someone who has passion in this particular interest. Thank you for that comment.
If anyone would like to ask a question or share anything, please feel free to type it in the chat box. I'm keeping my eye on the chat box. We still have a little bit of time if anybody would like to ask a question or share comments, thoughts. Sebastian is asking any recommended webinars or training sessions on sales. Any effective techniques to use when presenting information to potential employers about job seekers?
I would welcome you to go to the Griffin Hap website, and we are offering different webinars on job development, particularly during the age of COVID, doing virtual job development, if that's what you're asking about. I don't have the schedule at hand right now, but we have those types of webinars. We're also having conversations, and I'm almost positive that there is a conversation this Friday that you could sign up for.
And someone is asking about the recording of the webinars, and yes, the webinars will be available. We are posting all of the webinar recordings on our Transition Project webpage, which is on the Easter Seal Southern California website. If you go to the Transition Project, there's a whole page there with multiple resources, not only our webinars, but also videos, toolkits, links to other resources. So please be sure to check that out. We've had 6 webinars so far, and we will continue these monthly through November. And I'll just plug our next webinar on Wednesday, August 19th. I'm hearing some, sorry about that. I don't know what that was.
That was my fault. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. That's okay.
I wanted to show my face now that my internet is up. Hello.
I can stop sharing here.
You don't have to. I just wanted to take this opportunity to say
There
I'm alive. I'm a real person. I'm not a robot.
I think everybody can see you. So I just wanted to plug our next webinar, which is coming up on Wednesday, August 19th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And that topic is Tools for the Work World, Soft Skills. And our presenter will be Pearl Colbert, who is our Easter Seal Southern California Clinical Supervisor and Social Skills Lead. She runs a group for young adults, social skills, and she will be doing our webinar in August on that. And you can also check out the schedule of webinars coming up for the rest of the year on our Transition Project webpage as well. And someone is asking about the slides. Yes, we will share those as well on our webpage, and I'll also send those out once we finish today. If anyone has been on our email distribution list, I will send that out to you. And if you would like to email me directly to be put on our list, I will put my email address in the chat box for you as well. Any other questions while we've got Marcy with us? I'll keep my eye on the chat box here.
I pulled it up too. I hope this was helpful. I hope it gave you some ideas, and particularly I appreciate the question about presenting an individual in the most positive light, and that actually when you talk about a webinar on sales, we're not in the business of sales. We're in the business in fulfilling unmet needs for businesses. And I'm hoping that you've heard from some of the examples that the businesses didn't even know they had that unmet need. So you're there as a consultant through customized employment. You're there to offer solutions to help businesses be more efficient. So rather than sales, we're all about starting with the building of relationships. And then through that relationship building, you might get ideas of ways that an individual that you're working with can help fill a need. And it's the same thing with starting businesses. Brian's fulfilling a need with setting up vending machines. And certainly kettle corn is a very popular item these days. So if the business can be developed rather than a job being created, so be it. It depends on the individual. It depends on their interests and their skills and their abilities, their ideal conditions for employment. Again, I do hope this was helpful today, and want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to join this opportunity, and thank you, Pam, for contacting Griffin Hammis and working with us.
Of course. Thank you so much, Marcy. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. And again, please feel free to check out our project webpage. Feel free to email me directly. Again, we will be sending out the information from today as well as our upcoming webinar in August. And we hope that everybody has a great day. Stay safe, and we will see you soon. Thanks, Marcy.
Thank you, Pam. Have a great day, everyone. Be well. Be safe. Goodbye now.
Bye, Marcy.
Bye, Pam.